Hi, this is MikeRatner.com, and I'm the progenitor, host, and sort of producer of this raw feed podcast where I just ramble about a pseudo-philosophy I call ultra being. And it's packaged in this idea of Mike'sMastermind.com, which is the podcast name for now. And yet, the idea of creating a mastermind seems like an intriguing idea. It fits into today, the talk. So, I got to be a bit more regularly uploading them. I have an overseas friend, Omar, who's a podcast producer in his own right, and he just wants content. He wants work. So if we're going to build out a podcast channel, maybe this will be one of the flagship obscure ones. It's like, yeah, I've heard Mike's Mastermind talks about ultra being. What is this in the conception of enlightenment? And if we could really have our act together, and I make no claim towards that, it's sort of the observation of, it's like, wow, what are the possibilities of enlightenment? And that is the question to consider. Now, for today's talk in particular, I've been sort of recently rereading old writings and stuff. And by the way, if you want to read some of this stuff, you can go to, you can go to a couple places, but you can go to grandtourideas.com for a plaid or smattering of them, grandtourideas.com, and the particular domains that relate to the talks that are on mikesmastermind.com and some of the writing, which in the hopes of the future will be a book, a course, and maybe a seminar or a workshop on enlightenment. What are the possibilities of this? Because if we said that would be something still out there that needed to be sort of reckoned with, because it's that, right? And we're alluding to things, and I'm very cautious about alluding. And so now this is the introduction to the talk. So role play has been sort of in this regard of what I describe as a MORB, the modus operandi of rational behavior, in the way that it's acting out. And it's doing so through its TWA, the flight which we all take every day, the flight of fancy and altitude and attitude. TWA stands for being aware of your thoughts. What are you thinking? The words, what are you saying? And the way that you're showing up, acting, and actualizing. TWA, thoughts, words, and actions that speak louder than words. So folks, we're examining a sense of what would be enlightenment, which to me, and we all have our own definitions, and that's what's appreciated in this talk, as we're going to roll into this, is that there's plenty of freedom, and we can get out of judgment and sort of the, what I call cringe, where we might have a reaction to something, the mastery of the moment that if we're going to qualify as some form of enlightenment, and we want to have agreement on this, right, would be to catch yourself before you go into that lost element of TWA, where your thoughts are rampant about stuff that's sort of like, wow, right? Definitely occupying the moment, and for some, your life. Now, I'm guilty of that, man. I've had things on my mind for like 40-some years or more. I got curious about this stuff at a very young age. And even at 13, sort of began wondering about the concept. If we're talking about enlightenment and we're maturing towards some level of consciousness, what would it be? Now, a lot of different teachers and educators and neuroscientists and all these things, we all come to some sort of wavelength. What I mean by this, if a wavelength is like, well, there's a consensus of something, and it's definitely TWA, isn't it? It's like we're all thinking, we're all using words, saying something, and we're actualizing something. So it gets deep in this philosophy that I'm calling ultra being, is to examine, well, what would it be? And if we could imagine these types of states, could we not evolve enlightenment? Now, evolve to me is like involve. It's like, how does it mature in a way that we're really a quantum, you could say, transformation. So it's beyond just typical change. Something leaped forward in the awareness. Now, for me, I'd have to say, starting at a very young age did help. And experiences have definitely informed, like, hey, that didn't work, and what was the objective here? And we look at how we tie into things based on our time and our interest, which also harbors our intentions. And then we can engage with this quality of enlightenment, and we can sort of say it's energetic, or perhaps it's just sort of how we're affecting and playing into our immediate environment. On these talks on mikesmastermind.com, I look at sort of this quantum element. This basically, people say, well, it's the universe, Mike, isn't it? The cosmos. Yeah, what we can dwell in consciousness and examine. at least from a physicality aspects, we are talking about real physics here, is matter, energy, space, and time. So I call it the mess because it's the fabric of our real, you could say, inner dimension of life. Without matter, energy, space, and time, it could be a bit challenging. So mess, matter, energy, space, and time. That's just what it is. Ask any physicist. There is nothing but that. And then you could sort of, in those little sectors, those four silos, sort of define, things that might be string theory or quantum this and that. I don't know. It's fascinating to me. So I look at it from the psychic or psychological aspect. What do you mean by that, Mark? Well, things are messed up for a lot of people, wouldn't you say? M-E-S-T? Things are messed up because they have matters of concern. Some matters weighing them down. It could be money. It could be something mental. And then the E in the mess is sort of like, wow, where it could have been enlightenment energetically, you have people emotionally sort of distraught. So that would be the psychological realm of someone's energy, right? And then space. Space. A lot of spacey people out there, including the speaker. So the space dynamic is relationships, right? It's also colloquial in the sense that, we've designed sort of our immediate, you could say, concentrics. And concentrics to me are sort of like, well, I operate in this circle in my apartment, then I go out to, you could say, your job, or if you're teaching at school or involved in some activity, which is really great that you can get out and have a relationship with your community. It is sort of a spatial dynamic in the way of how we get along. We're affecting the environment. So matter, energy, space, and how we work between also affects the quality of our time. And for most people, that's pretty much all that they got to claim. They've got some time. And if we can appreciate it on this level, we're functional. Otherwise, people are complaining about don't have enough time. My gosh, we all have about the same amount of time, but some people don't have enough of it. And then other people just lost a lot of time, me included, right? Ooh. But what did it bring us to in the way that we can understand the fabric of our life, matter, energy, space, and time, right? So if we can engage on some level of mastery and make this the claim of enlightenment, then there's a role to play. How we function in this universe. Are things going to be messed in just the way that they are and needs are messed? Or are things just really messed up? And the UP is universal and perpetual. So we have to deal with it. So for some, the savants, the saints, the gurus, the masters, they claim to be detached. They've let it go. That's what they say. So they are in the world, but they're not of it. Well, a lot of people are made or manufactured in this more of idea, the TWA, that thoughts have just been given to them and they've just adopted it. They don't question it. The words they're using, oh my God, if children are present, you got to hold their ears. Is there any self-realization in this regard to quantify what would ultra being be? Having some level of I-awareness, mastery of the moment, so where I can capture myself in my own thoughts and choose what I think, what I say. And what actualizes is just really sort of more, if we want to be profound, just sort of very open, friendly, decent, attentive, caring, respectful, all those qualities that might define character, right? True charity and community connection. We all want a great connection. And that's why the tithe, really having an appreciation for time, one's interest, and how you're going to engage them, what your intentions are, and then this energy dynamic. A bit of more of, you could say, an attunement and just an appreciation. And you could go back to what the gurus are saying, just be empty. Allowing. As the observer, Krishnamurti said, be the observer observed. As we're able to sort of see ourselves, and this goes into my writing of IGO, IGO research.com, IGOresearch.com, or IGOism.com. It's the projection, man, of our identity. It's the selfie of the mind, man. Have you imagined it? Yeah. Have we paid any attention to it? Not really. So I think it's time to sort of put a fine lens on things and not to get sort of overly sort of preachy or sort of saying you're wrong about this or we got to do it that way. No, it is what it is. And as we observe it, as social scientists, you might make some note about it and you might have to filter it, divine it between your biases and the thoughts that were given to you and the impression in the way that you can observe on this level that opens up, or you could say releases and brings forth this dynamic of ultra being, whatever this would be for you. And the formula that I came up with, which, you can certainly refine and adopt for yourself and spread like a meme, is UBE3. It's very similar to Gandhi's dictum, Mahatma Gandhi in India. You be the change you want to see in the world. I call it Gandhi's dictum. You want to see something changed? Be it, demonstrate it, flow it, act as if, right? And then I relate it to Einstein's E equals mc squared. That sounds good, right? So UBE3. Yeah, this is it. We can pass this on. This will be the change agent for everyone. UBE3. Ultra being, an excellent example of enlightenment. As you explain it, as you explore it, as you experiment with it. Yeah, it's your story. And if we had something that sort of lit up the frontal cortex, which is more towards things that are positive and good and forward and in the momentum of like, whew, we make it happen. I call them my Indian chiefs, but literally they're my Native American friends. When one would sit, in front of a chief or a shaman or someone that was kind of considered somebody, like this gray wolf designation of the invisible teacher, what shows up is sort of this inner understanding through introspection. And it is sort of about letting it go in order to grasp it. And yet you might still desire something, because something might not feel quite yet ready or complete or as good as it could be or should be. Well, then the refinement process here is this introspection and examining the roles that we play and how we can sort of play out in a way. I've called it this morning a new word, but it adds into the idea of role play and how we are, in our sectors of society, parts of the cringe dynamic spectrum. We're all on the spectrum somewhere. So cringefactors.com talks about a couple different things, but heteronomy, how things are sort of, I love this Greek word, I got to have a book on it, heteronomy. Sort of like in our orbit of things of day-to-day life, how we're just sort of like puppets on a string. We just don't quite see it. It's a control factor. And it's way beyond just what people say, oh, it's your sign, man. It's astronomy. It's how the planets are positioned. Well, I guess it could be if you believe so. Maybe there's some evidence. I just look at this from a social science point of view, and I just go, I can decipher it and filter it, and how I divine it is to put it in this context of like, well, what is the most enlightening aspect? And is there a lesson here to be learned in order to get to that, you could say, ultimate refinement point? And really, if you're talking about being, it's sort of like a 0 point. It's sort of like being a bit grounded, taking a breath, checking one's posture, really ultra being present, right? And this is sort of the gift. And when we're at this level, it seems to be something that is present. I call it a connection. Other people might say, like, well, yeah, if they're New Agey, they might have something else in terms with it, or religious, or some other tradition. And I guess you look at it from, psychology, or maybe you could say some kind of higher wisdom learning traditions. It seems like, well, yeah, there's something to be said about letting it go, as Guy Finley would say, right? Living between the gaps is, living more in the gap. I'd say between the gaps. Wow. So there we have it. And much has to do how we respond in situations and how we are in the moment. So it's definitely sort of you could say some self-realization aspect in the way if we might think of humanistic psychology. From a humanistic point of view, we're looking at sort of the finer qualities that would sort of lead people to lead more healthier and happier lifestyles. And that would be the model rather than sort of what's wrong with you. So it's a different type of approach. Well, I want to talk more about rolling in a continuing series as we roll along, because I think the idea of rolling is to examine ourselves, phenomenologically speaking, which is related to this writing that you'll find at grandtourideas.com, and what's behind the ego and it animates the morb, the modus operandi of rational behavior, and why we're in a mass trance, masstrance.com. I know I just thrown a lot at you here, but here's the consensus of between my brain cells and neurons going back and forth, that there is a cosmology here. And if we can express it and understand it in the way that we can come from a vantage point of ultra being present, ultra being loving, ultra being kind and gentle, as I've learned and observed from my teachers and people who I thought were really excellent in the way of their ultra being in some capacity. It doesn't mean that someone's totally whole-brained and they're ingenious in the way that they just show up. It's sort of, as we trip in through life and through the mass trance, we can sort of make the best of it. So as